Every morning for 3 years, John Harrison has visited his wife Sarah's grave with fresh daisies in hand. Today started like any other until he saw her. A young woman in expensive clothes stood by Sarah's headstone, looking out of place in the small-town cemetery. Her shoulders shook as she cried quietly, one hand touching the cold stone. John almost didn't approach, but something made him walk closer. The woman didn't notice him at first. She was lost in thought, staring at an old photo she held. When she finally spoke, her whispered words stopped John in his tracks. "She saved me." In her trembling hands was a photograph from 15 years ago, the day his wife Sarah rescued a scared teenage girl from a terrible accident. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Polaroid trembled in Claire Anderson's manicured hands as she held it out to John. The image was faded but clear enough. A mangled sports car lying upside down in a rain-filled ditch, steam rising from its crushed hood. The timestamp in the corner read, June 15th, 2009. John's breath caught in his throat. He remembered that day all too well. "I was 17, Claire said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Trying to prove something to my father, driving too fast on these country roads. The rain had just started, and I took that curve by Miller's Creek too quickly." She closed her eyes, reliving the moment. The car hydroplaned. Everything went sideways, then upside down. I was trapped. Water rising around me. John's hands shook as he took the photo. Sarah had come home that day, soaking wet. Her favorite blue dress ruined with mud and engine oil. She'd been unusually quiet that evening, making calls to the local hospital to check on that poor young girl. "I never knew who she was," Claire continued. "I was barely conscious when she pulled me out. By the time I woke up in the hospital, she was gone." The emergency workers said a local woman had seen the accident, climbed down into the ditch, and somehow managed to get my door open. "She held my head above water until help arrived." Claire's voice cracked. "They said if she hadn't been there, I wouldn't have made it." John remembered how Sarah had brushed off any praise when the local paper tried to do a story. "Anyone would have done the same," she'd said, changing the subject whenever it came up. That was Sarah. Always helping others, never wanting recognition. "I tried to find her," Claire said, "but no one seemed to know who she was. The hospital had no record of her name. The emergency workers couldn't remember. I've spent years." She gestured helplessly at the grave. "And now I've finally found her, but it's too late to say thank you." John pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, one of Sarah's, embroidered with her initials, and offered it to Claire. As she dabbed at her eyes, he noticed how young she still looked, despite the expensive clothes and air of success about her. Just a few years older than their Amy would have been. "Would you like to hear about her?" John asked, surprising himself. He hadn't talked about Sarah to anyone in a long time, but something in Claire's expression, the mix of gratitude and loss, touched a chord in him. Claire nodded, carefully folding the handkerchief. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Harrison." "John," he corrected gently. "And I think Sarah would have wanted you to keep that." He nodded at the handkerchief. She always did have a way of knowing exactly what someone needed. The morning sun had burned away the mist now, warming the cold stone of Sarah's grave. John looked at the fresh daisies he still held, then laid them carefully against the headstone. "Why don't you come back to the house?" he suggested. "I'll put on some coffee, and I can show you the kind of person Sarah was." The kind of person who would never hesitate to climb down into a ditch to save a stranger. The farmhouse kitchen looked exactly as Sarah had left it. Sunlight streamed through gingham curtains, casting warm patterns on the worn wooden table. John moved with practiced efficiency, measuring coffee grounds into the old percolator while Claire took in her surroundings. "She loved this kitchen," John said, his voice soft with memory, "said it was the heart of everything." He gestured to a shelf lined with mason jars, each filled with dried herbs and carefully labeled in Sarah's neat handwriting. "She grew all of those herself." Claire walked closer to examine the jars. Lavender, chamomile, sage, she read aloud. Did she use them for cooking? Cooking, medicine, helping neighbors. John pulled out a chair for Claire. Sarah believed every plant had a purpose. He reached for a thick, leather-bound book on the counter, its pages swollen with tucked-in notes and newspaper clippings. This was her Bible. The recipe book's cover was soft with age, the leather cracked but well cared for. As John placed it on the table, a pressed flower, a perfect dried daisy, slipped from between its pages. Claire caught it before it could fall. She loved daisies, didn't she? Said they were honest flowers. John smiled, pouring coffee into two mismatched mugs. No pretense, just simple beauty, like her. Opening the book revealed more than just recipes. Between instructions for bread and pie crusts were Sarah's observations about life, little notes in the margins. Added extra. Cinnamon, John's mother loved it, and perfect for Mrs. Miller's arthritis, beside a herb tea blend. She kept track of everyone's preferences, John explained, pointing to various notes. Who was allergic to what? Who needed cheering up with their favorite cookies? Which kids were having trouble at school and could use a fresh-baked surprise? Claire ran her finger gently along one page, tracing Sarah's handwriting. She really knew everyone, didn't she? Sarah had a way of seeing people, really seeing them. John sipped his coffee. Not just what they showed the world, but what they needed. Like that day she found you. Claire's hands tightened around her mug. How did she know? To stop, to help. That was Sarah. John turned to a dog-eared page. Look here. The day after your accident, she wrote this. Remember to check on the girl. Sometimes the worst injuries aren't the ones you can see. Tears welled in Claire's eyes as she read the note. She checked on me, called the hospital every day for a week. They couldn't give her much information, but she needed to know you. We're okay. John cleared his throat. That was her way, caring about strangers like they were family. Claire wiped her eyes. I wish I could have known her. Really known her, not just as the woman who saved me. John nodded, understanding in his eyes. Maybe you can, through these. He gestured to the recipe book. Every page has a piece of her story, and I think, he paused, considering his words. I think she'd want you to know it. The coffee grew cold as they sat there, turning pages, John sharing the stories behind each recipe and note. Outside, the morning deepened toward noon, sunlight shifting on the kitchen floor. In that peaceful space, surrounded by Sarah's words and memories, something began to heal in both of them, a bridge forming between loss and gratitude, between past and present. There's so much life in these pages, Claire said finally, touching. A recipe for blackberry cobbler that had perfect for summer, written in excited capitals. Yes, John agreed, his voice rough with emotion. That was Sarah's gift. She didn't just cook food or grow herbs, she nourished people's souls. He looked at Claire, like she did for you, that day by Miller's Creek. They sat in comfortable silence, the recipe book open between them, each lost in thoughts of the woman who had touched their lives so profoundly, the farmer's wife who saw beauty in simple things and never missed a chance to help a soul in need. Claire reached into her designer handbag, hesitated for a moment, then pulled out a small velvet pouch. I've carried this with me every day since the accident. Her fingers trembled as she loosened the drawstring, carefully withdrawing a faded hospital bracelet. The plastic was yellowed with age, but the text was still legible. Anderson Claire E. Admitted 6th 1509. John stared at the bracelet, remembering how Sarah had paced their kitchen that night, phone in hand, waiting for news. You kept it. All this time. It reminds me not to waste the second chance I was given. Claire placed the bracelet on the kitchen table next to Sarah's recipe book. I was such a different person before the accident. Angry, rebellious. I thought I was invincible. She traced the bracelet's edge with her fingertip. My father was this powerful CEO who never had time for his family. My mother drowned her loneliness in charity galas and wine. I was their only child, but sometimes I felt like an afterthought, just another asset to manage. John listened quietly, seeing echoes of Sarah's compassion in the way she'd recognized something deeper in this lost teenager that day. That morning, I'd had a huge fight with my father, Claire continued. He'd cancelled our summer vacation again for some corporate merger. I stole his precious sports car just to hurt him, drove out to these back roads where nobody would find me. She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Guess I was wrong about that part. The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the background as Claire gathered her thoughts. When I woke up in the hospital, everything had changed. My father was there, looking terrified for the first time in my life. My mother hadn't touched a drink in days, and all I could think about was the woman who'd held my head above water, talking to me so calmly while we waited for help. She pulled a tissue from her purse, dabbing at her eyes. The doctors said I was lucky, no permanent injuries, but they were wrong about that too. Everything about me was permanently changed. I couldn't stop thinking about her. This stranger who risked her life for me, who disappeared before I could even say thank you. John nodded slowly. Sarah never wanted recognition. She'd say, anyone would have done the same. Claire finished with him, smiling through her tears. The emergency workers told me she said that. That was Sarah, John agreed, but she was wrong about that. Not everyone would climb down into a flooded ditch for a stranger. Claire picked up the hospital bracelet again. After I recovered, I went to college. Started studying business, but not to please my father anymore. I wanted to do something meaningful. Started a foundation that helps rural hospitals get better emergency equipment. She paused. Every time we donate a new rescue tool, I think about her. Wonder if it might help another Sarah, save another foolish teenager. The morning light had shifted, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. John stood, moving to the counter to pour them both fresh coffee. Sarah would have loved that. Turning pain into purpose. That was her way, too. I tried so hard to find her, Claire said, accepting the refilled mug. Hired private investigators, searched newspaper archives, but no one had her name. The emergency workers only remembered a woman in a blue dress who left before they could get her information. The hospital had nothing. It was like searching for a guardian angel. John smiled at that. She'd laugh at being called an angel. She just saw herself as a farmer's wife who tried to do right by people. But she was more than that, Claire insisted. She changed the course of my entire life that day, not just by saving me, but by showing me what real courage looks like, what it means to help someone without expecting anything in return. She took a deep breath. I've spent 15 years wanting to thank her, and now you can honor her, John said gently, by living the life she helped you find. Claire looked down at the hospital bracelet, then at Sarah's recipe book, 2 artifacts from different worlds, connected by one woman's simple act of kindness. Will you tell me more about her? About your life together? I want to know everything. Who she was, what she loved, how she lived. Maybe then I can understand better how she became the kind of person who would stop that day. John felt something warm stir in his chest. The first real stirring of healing he'd felt since Sarah's passing. I'd like that, he said, and I think Sarah would too. Would you like to see the rest of the farm? John asked, setting his empty coffee mug in the sink. Sarah spent most of her time in the gardens when she wasn't in the kitchen. Claire nodded eagerly, following him through the back door onto a wraparound porch. The view took her breath away. Acres of land stretched out before them, morning sunlight painting the fields gold. To their right, an overgrown garden space showed hints of its former glory through the weeds. This was her pride and joy, John said, leading Claire down the worn steps. He reached into a weathered garden shed and pulled out a dirt-stained notebook, its pages warped from humidity and age. Her garden journal. She planned everything in here. Claire accepted the notebook carefully. Sarah's handwriting filled every page, accompanied by detailed drawings of garden layouts, planting schedules, and pressed leaves. She was an artist, Claire murmured, touching a delicate sketch of an herb spiral. She saw beauty in everything. John agreed. Even weeds had a purpose in her world. He gestured to the overgrown beds. Used to be the most productive garden in the county. She grew enough to supply half the restaurants in town, plus the food bank. Flipping through the journal, Claire found detailed notes about crop rotation, companion planting, and natural pest control. But between the technical details were dreams sketched in margins, plans for a teaching garden, a community space where people could learn to grow their own food. She wanted to turn this into something bigger, Claire realized, studying a page titled Future Projects, a place where people could come together. John's face shadowed slightly. That was her dream, but after she got sick, he trailed off, looking at the untamed garden beds. It's hard enough keeping the main farm going these days. Claire walked deeper into the garden, pushing aside tall grass to reveal raised beds built from reclaimed wood. Despite years of neglect, some of Sarah's hardier plants had survived. Time crept along the ground. Mint fought for space with weeds, and a few stubborn rose bushes bloomed defiantly. The bones are still here, Claire said softly. Everything she planned, it's all still possible. Maybe, John replied, but his tone was hesitant. Farming's not what it used to be. Big corporations buying up all the land, prices dropping every year. He ran a hand through his grey hair. Sarah had the magic touch with this place. Me, I'm just trying to hold on. Claire continued reading through the journal, noting how Sarah had tracked the garden's income, expenses, and potential for growth. Her business mind started working, seeing possibilities in Sarah's careful plans. She wasn't just gardening, Claire said. She was building a sustainable business model. Look at these calculations. She knew exactly how to make this profitable. John smiled sadly. That was Sarah, always thinking 3 steps ahead. He looked around at the overgrown space. Wish I had half her vision. But you do, Claire insisted. You've kept the farm going all this time, and her plans are all here. She held up the journal. Maybe this is why I was meant to find you now, to help bring her vision to life. John's expression grew guarded. That's kind of you. But this isn't your responsibility. You don't owe us anything. I owe her everything, Claire corrected gently. And this, she gestured to the garden, the fields beyond, the whole farm. This is her legacy. It deserves a chance. The morning breeze stirred the tall grass, carrying the sweet scent of wild roses. In the distance, a tractor rumbled to life, the day's work waiting for no one. John looked at the garden journal in Claire's hands, seeing it through new eyes. Not just as a record of what was lost, but maybe, just maybe, as a blueprint for what could be. She'd like that, he said finally. You seeing what she saw here. He didn't mention the mounting bills, the bank's increasingly stern letters, the real possibility that none of this would be his by year's end. For just this moment, he let himself share in Claire's hope, in the possibility that Sarah's dreams for this place might not be finished after all. Later that afternoon, while John was showing Claire the old greenhouse, his neighbor Tom pulled up in a rusty pickup. The expression on his weathered face told John everything before he even stepped out of the truck. Mail came, Tom said quietly, holding out a handful of envelopes. His eyes flickered briefly to Claire, then back to John. Thought I'd save you the trip to the box. John knew which letter Tom meant without looking. The bank's logo was clearly visible through the thin envelope. Their 3rd notice this month. Thanks, he said, trying to keep his voice casual. Having coffee inside? Sarah's recipe book's out. But Tom shook his head. Got to get back to the South Field. Just call if you need anything, John. The unspoken understanding hung between them as Tom drove away. Claire pretended not to notice the interaction, focusing instead on the greenhouse's broken panels. But when John's hands trembled slightly opening the letter, she couldn't stay quiet. Is everything all right? John stared at the notice. The words he'd been dreading finally there in black and white. Final notice of default and intent to foreclose. 90 days, that's all the time he had left with Sarah's farm. John, Claire's voice was gentle. Maybe I could help. No. The word came out sharper than he intended. John folded the letter, carefully tucking it into his pocket. Thank you, but no, this isn't your concern. But if Sarah's garden plans could work, Claire. John turned to face her fully. You're a kind person. I can see why Sarah stopped that day. But this farm, these problems, they're mine to handle. Claire was quiet for a moment, studying the proud man before her. Did you know what I do for a living? The question caught John off guard. Something successful, judging by your clothes. I run a venture capital firm specializing in agricultural innovation. She touched one of the greenhouse's broken panels. We help family farms transition to sustainable models. It's what Sarah was already planning, according to her journal. John shook his head. I'm not looking for charity. Neither am I. Claire's voice grew firm. I'm looking for investment opportunities and Sarah's plans. She pulled out the garden journal. They're exactly what my firm promotes. Local food systems, educational programs, community integration. She was years ahead of her time. The afternoon sun filtered through the greenhouse's dusty panels, casting dappled shadows on the empty growing tables. John could almost see Sarah there, planning her next season's crops, always believing in possibilities. I couldn't ask. You're not asking. I'm offering. Claire held his gaze. Not because I feel obligated, but because this is a sound business. Opportunity. Sarah knew it 15 years ago. The markets finally caught up to her vision. John touched the letter in his pocket. 90 days to save everything he and Sarah had built. 90 days to decide between pride and practicality. Between holding on alone and accepting help from the last person Sarah had helped. Sleep on it, Claire said softly, sensing his struggle. The bank's notice isn't going anywhere. Neither am I. She pulled a business card from her purse, setting it on one of the empty growing tables. Sarah gave me a second chance that day. Maybe this is my chance to pass that gift forward. As they walked back to the house, John found himself seeing the farm through new eyes. The overgrown garden wasn't just a reminder of loss now, it was full of possibility. The broken greenhouse panels could be fixed. The empty growing tables could bloom again. But accepting help meant admitting he couldn't do it alone. Meant letting someone else into the careful isolation he'd built since Sarah's death. Meant trusting that sometimes, like that rainy day 15 years ago, help comes from unexpected places. The foreclosure notice weighed heavy in his pocket, but for the first time in months, it didn't feel like an ending. Maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning Sarah had been planning all along. Back in her hotel room that evening, Claire spread Sarah's garden journal across the desk. Her laptop glowed with research tabs, local zoning laws, agricultural grants, community development initiatives. But it was a forgotten folder at the back of Sarah's journal that held her attention now. Harrison Farm Community Garden Project, read the carefully printed title page. The business plan was handwritten on yellowed paper, dated just months before Sarah's diagnosis. Claire touched the faded ink, imagining Sarah sitting at her kitchen table, plotting the farm's future while the world slept. The plan was remarkably sophisticated. Sarah had mapped out a three-phase transformation. First, renovating the existing garden into a teaching space. Then, partnering with local restaurants for farm-to-table programs. Finally, expanding into a full community agriculture center with classes, events, and garden plots for rent. Claire's phone buzzed, her assistant with the preliminary market research she'd requested. You were right, the text read. The area's perfect for this kind of development. No similar programs within 100 miles. Switching to her email, Claire found responses from the state's agricultural board. 3 different grant programs matched Sarah's original vision. One specifically supported farms transitioning to educational facilities. Oh, Sarah, Claire whispered, you saw it all coming. She pulled up the county record she'd accessed that afternoon. The Harrison farm sat at a perfect junction, close enough to town for easy access, but rural enough to offer a true farming experience. Sarah's plan had even accounted for parking expansion and road improvements. A knock at her door interrupted her research. The hotel clerk held up a thick envelope. "These were just delivered for you, Ms. Anderson. From the Historical Society?" Inside, Claire found photographs spanning 30 years of the Harrison farm. Sarah appeared in many of them, always in the background, always working, teaching local, kids about composting, showing restaurant owners her herb gardens, running workshops on canning and preserving. She was building the foundation for her dream, Claire realized, one relationship at a time. The community connections were already there, just waiting to be revived. Claire opened her laptop again, fingers flying over the keys as she updated. Her standard investment proposal. This wasn't just about saving a farm, it was about fulfilling a vision that had been growing for decades. Her phone buzzed again. The local agricultural extension office had responded to her inquiry. "Mrs. Harrison's workshops were legendary," the agent wrote. "We still get people asking if they'll ever start up again." By midnight, Claire had a preliminary business plan drafted, building on Sarah's original framework, but updated with modern financing options and current market data. The numbers worked. They more than worked. They showed potential for significant growth. But would John accept the help? Claire remembered his resistance that afternoon, the way he'd pulled back at the mere suggestion of assistance. She understood pride. It had nearly killed her once. In a rain-filled ditch on a country road. She turned to a fresh page in her notebook, starting a list of approach strategies. John needed to see this wasn't charity. It was an investment in Sarah's legacy, a way to share her gifts with a new generation. The hotel room's small coffee maker gurgled as Claire worked through the night. She'd learned persistence from the best. A woman who had held her head above water and refused to let go. A woman who had planned for her community's future even while facing her own mortality. By dawn, Claire had a complete presentation ready. Not the slick corporate slideshows she usually prepared, but something that felt more authentic, something that honored both Sarah's vision and John's dedication to the land. She gathered the papers carefully, Sarah's original plan, the grant applications, the community feedback, the financial projections. Now she just had to find the right way to share them with John. "Help me with this," she whispered to Sarah's memory as the sun rose over the small town. "Show me how to reach him, like you reached me that day." The next morning, Claire arrived at the local diner to find it buzzing with activity. Word had spread about the stranger asking questions about Sarah Harrison, and it seemed every regular had a story to share. Martha, the silver-haired waitress, who'd served breakfast here for 40 years, set down a leather-bound photo album next to Claire's coffee. "Found this in the back room," she said, patting the worn cover. "We used to keep community photos here. Sarah's in most of them." The album's first page showed the diner's grand opening in 1983. There in the background, a young Sarah Harrison served pie with a smile that lit up her whole face. "That was her secret recipe," Martha said, pointing to the pie. "Apple rosemary. Sounds strange, but it won the county fair 5 years running." Each turn of the page revealed another facet of Sarah's life. Here she was teaching a canning class at the community center. There, judging the children's garden competition at the state fair. A newspaper clipping showed her accepting an award for the farm's innovative education programs. "She never wanted credit for anything," came a gruff voice. Tom, John's neighbor, slid into the booth across from Claire. "But she changed this town, bit by bit." More people gathered as the morning wore on. Nancy from the library brought in her own album, full of photos from the reading garden Sarah had helped design. She said every child deserved a beautiful place to read, Nancy explained, showing Claire pictures of the garden's construction. The town's retired doctor stopped by with a carefully preserved thank-you note. "Sarah grew special herbs for my patients who couldn't afford regular medicine," he said quietly. "Never charged a penny. Said it was just being neighborly." Through it all, Claire took careful notes, building a picture of Sarah's impact on the community. The woman who had saved her life that day hadn't just been a farmer's wife. She'd been the thread that held this small town together. "What about the farm's education programs?" Claire asked, remembering Sarah's business plan. "Does anyone remember?" Those. The diner erupted in nostalgic chatter. Everyone, it seemed, had either attended Sarah's workshops or knew someone who had. "My Tommy learned to grow tomatoes there," offered Rita, the post office clerk. "Now he's got a degree in agricultural science." "She taught my whole scout troop about sustainable farming," added Mike, the hardware store owner. "Way before it was trendy." The photos told the story of a woman who saw potential everywhere, in abandoned lots turned into community gardens, in struggling families taught to grow their own food, in children learning to love nature through her gentle guidance. "Last, a project she was planning," Martha said, turning to the album's final pages, "was something bigger. A real learning center at the farm. Had all the plans drawn up, but then the words hung heavy in the air. Everyone knew how the story had ended. Sarah's sudden illness, the programs gradually stopping, John's quiet withdrawal into his grief. "Shame about the foreclosure," Tom muttered, and Claire's head snapped up. "You know about that?" "Small." "In town," he shrugged. "We all know, just don't know how to help. John's got his pride." Claire looked down at the photo album, at Sarah's smiling face in image after image. Every picture showed her building something: relationships, gardens, community. She'd known all along that the farm's future lay in education and community. Involvement. She'd laid the groundwork, prepared the soil, planted the seeds. "Maybe," Claire said slowly, "we need to show John he's not alone. That Sarah's work meant something to everyone here." The diner grew quiet as people considered her words. Then Martha straightened her apron with determination. "Tell us what you need," she said. "Sarah helped every one of us at some point. Time we returned the favor." Claire looked around at the faces. Weathered farmers, local business owners, teachers, parents, all people whose lives Sarah had touched, all potential allies in saving her legacy. "First," she said, pulling out Sarah's business plan, "I need you to tell me if this dream is still what the community needs." They gathered closer as she began to explain, the photo album lying open between them. Sarah's smile, watching over them all. The afternoon sun slanted through the farmhouse windows as Claire helped John sort through Sarah's recipe book. They'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm, John sharing memories as Claire carefully catalogued Sarah's notes and recipes. "Wait," Claire said, pausing at a page stuck together. "There's something—" Carefully she eased the pages apart, revealing an envelope that had been pressed between them. The paper was cream-colored, sealed but never sent, with "For John" written in Sarah's distinctive handwriting. John's hands trembled as he took the envelope. I didn't know this was here. Do you want me to give you some privacy?" Claire asked softly, but John shook his head. "Stay, please." He broke the seal carefully, unfolding the letter inside. "My dearest John," he read aloud, voice rough with emotion. "If you're reading this, it means I've run out of time to tell you everything I needed to say. But maybe that's fitting. We always did better with written words than spoken ones." Claire sat quietly, watching as John gathered strength to continue. "The doctors say I have months, but we both know time has its own plans. Before I go, I need you to understand something. This farm isn't just land and buildings. It's every dream we built together, every person we helped, every life we touched. Remember that girl in the car accident? I never told you, but that day changed something in me. It showed me what this place could be. Not just a farm, but a sanctuary, a place where people could find help, hope, and healing." John paused, wiping his eyes. Claire reached across the table, touching his hand gently. "I've left plans," the letter continued. "Real plans, not just dreams. The garden programs, the teaching kitchen, the community plots. It's all mapped out. Don't let my passing be the end of this vision, John. You have so much still to give, so much wisdom to share. And when you're ready, because I know you'll need time, look for help. It will come from unexpected places, just like that rainy day when I found that girl in the ditch." The kitchen was silent, except for the ticking of the old clock Sarah had loved. "The hardest part of leaving isn't saying goodbye to you. It's knowing I won't see our dreams for this place come true. But I believe in you, John Harrison. I believe you'll find a way to keep this farm growing, keep it helping people, keep it bringing light into dark places. That's what we've always done best together." John's voice broke on the final lines. "All my love for all time, Sarah." Claire sat in respectful silence as John folded the letter carefully. When he finally looked up, his eyes were clear and focused. "She knew," he said quietly. "Somehow, she knew someone would come." "Sarah always did see further than most," Claire replied. "She saved me that day, but she was also saving this moment, saving you from having to do this alone." John looked around the kitchen, at the recipe book, the garden journal, the business plans, and now this letter. Each piece a breadcrumb Sarah had left, leading them to this moment. "I've been so focused on what we lost," he said slowly. "I forgot about everything she wanted us to build." "It's not too late," Claire said gently. "The community still believes in Sarah's vision. They want to help, John. They're just waiting for you to let them." John picked up the letter again, reading Sarah's words silently. When he looked up, something had shifted in his expression. "Tell me about these plans you've been working on," he said. "The ones based on Sarah's notes. I think it's time I started listening." Claire smiled, understanding the magnitude of what had just happened. "Sometimes," she realized, "you had to lose your way completely before finding the path that was meant for you all along. Sarah would be proud of you," she said softly. "No," John corrected, a small smile touching his lips. "She'd say, 'It's about and time,' and then hand us both a to-do list." For the first time since Sarah's death, John laughed. The sound echoed through the kitchen like a long-awaited spring thaw, promising new growth and possibilities ahead. The next morning found John and Claire at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers. The grant application lay between them, its blank spaces waiting to be filled with their shared vision for the farm's future. "Start with the history," Claire suggested, laptop open to her research. "The grant committee needs to understand what makes this place special." John nodded, picking up his pen. As he wrote, decades of memories flowed onto the page. He described how Sarah had transformed their simple farm into a community hub, how she'd seen potential in every acre, every person who crossed their path. "Listen to this part," he said, reading from his draft. "For 30 years, Harrison Farm has been more than a business. It's been a classroom, a gathering place, and a source of hope for our community. Through sustainable farming practices and educational programs, we've helped hundreds of families connect with the land and learn to feed themselves." Claire smiled, recognizing Sarah's influence in his words. "That's perfect. Now we need to outline the new programs." They worked through the morning, combining John's practical farming knowledge with Claire's business expertise. Sarah's original plans served as their foundation, updated with modern techniques and market research. "The grant requires community support letters," Claire said, reaching for her briefcase. "I might have something for that." She pulled out a stack of papers, dozens of letters from townspeople collected over the past 2 days. Each one shared a story about Sarah, about the farm, about what this place meant to them. John read them one by one, his eyes growing damp. The hardware store owner writing about Sarah's gardening workshops, the school principal describing field trips that had inspired students to start their own gardens, the retired doctor praising her knowledge of medicinal herbs. "I had no idea," he whispered. "All these years I thought we were just farming." "You were growing more than crops," Claire said softly. "You were growing community." They turned back to the application, energized by the outpouring of support. Claire's financial projections showed how the farm could become self-sustaining through a combination of educational programs, organic produce sales, and workshop fees. Sarah's original business plan was solid, Claire explained, pointing to her updated spreadsheets. We just need to modernize it. Add online components, expand the reach. John studied the numbers, seeing his wife's dreams translated into concrete possibilities. The greenhouse could be converted to a teaching space, he suggested. Sarah always said it had the best light for demonstrations. Hours passed as they refined their proposal. The grant application grew stronger with each revision, each detail carefully considered. They were no longer just trying to save a farm. They were building on Sarah's legacy, creating something new while honoring what came before. One last section, Claire said finally. Project impact statement. Why this matters, why now, why here? John picked up his pen, then hesitated. You should write this part, he said. You understand both sides, what we're trying to save and what it means to be saved. Claire nodded, understanding the trust he was placing in her. She began to write, letting her heart guide her words. Harrison Farm stands at a crossroads, both literally and figuratively. In one direction lies the loss of a community treasure, a place where generations have learned to nurture both land and spirit. In the other lies the opportunity to build something extraordinary, a living testament to the power of one woman's vision and her community's determination to carry it forward. 15 years ago, Sarah Harrison saved a young girl's life on these roads. Today we have the chance to save her dream. This grant would do more than preserve a farm. It would create a center for agricultural education, sustainable living, and community healing. It would prove that sometimes the most powerful changes grow from the smallest seeds of kindness. John read her words silently, then added a final line in his steady handwriting. In Sarah's memory, and for all those yet to find their way here, we ask for the opportunity to grow this dream into reality. Together they gathered the papers, checked every detail, and prepared the application for submission. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, in Sarah's kitchen, surrounded by her books and plans and spirit, they had taken the first step towards saving her legacy. Local Farms Revival brings hope to community, read the headline in the Valley Herald. John stared at his own photo on the front page, him and Claire standing in the newly cleared garden, Sarah's journal open between them. The morning sun caught his weathered face in a rare smile. Claire rushed into the kitchen, waving her own copy of the paper. Have you seen it? They got it exactly right. Together, they read the article that had the whole town talking. In an age of corporate agriculture and vanishing family farms, one local property is writing a different story. Harrison Farm, a fixture in our community for over 3 decades, is undergoing a transformation that's capturing hearts and imaginations. This isn't just about saving a farm, says Claire Anderson, the unexpected catalyst behind the revival. It's about honoring a legacy of community service started by Sarah Harrison and showing that small farms can thrive in the modern world. The story of Harrison Farm's resurrection began with a chance encounter at a grave site, but its roots go much deeper. Sarah Harrison, who passed away 3 years ago, left behind more than just a grieving husband and a struggling farm. She left plans, detailed blueprints for turning the property into an educational center that could serve the community for generations to come. Sarah always saw the bigger picture, says John Harrison, standing in the garden his wife once tended. She knew farms had to evolve to survive. I just didn't understand until now. John paused in his reading as Martha, from the diner, bustled in through the kitchen door, carrying a fresh apple pie. You're famous, she announced, setting down the pie. Everyone's talking about it. Tommy's already asking when the workshops will start. The article lay open on the table as more visitors arrived, each bringing food, memories, and offers of help. Claire watched John welcome them, noting how much easier it seemed now, how the weight of isolation was lifting from his shoulders. They returned to the article between guests. Community response has been overwhelming. Local businesses have pledged support, from donated materials to professional services. The high school's agriculture program has offered student volunteers. Even neighboring farms have stepped forward, offering expertise and equipment. Sarah helped all of us at some point, says Tom Miller, whose farm adjoins the Harrison property. Now it's our turn to help keep her dream alive. The proposed center will offer classes in sustainable farming, cooking, and food preservation. Plans include renovating the historic greenhouse for year-round education, creating demonstration gardens, and establishing a farm-to-table program with local restaurants. But perhaps most compelling is the personal story behind the revival. Claire Anderson, a successful agricultural investment consultant, first encountered the Harrison family 15 years ago when Sarah Harrison saved her life after a car accident. I never got to thank her, Anderson admits, but maybe this is better than thanks. Maybe this is what she was saving me for. The kitchen door swung open again as Rita from the post office arrived with a stack of mail. "You've got letters," she announced proudly, "from all over the state, people reading about the farm, wanting to know how they can help." John opened one envelope, then another. Offers of support poured out, farming experts willing to teach, families eager to participate, businesses wanting to partner. "Sarah would love this," he said softly, looking around his crowded kitchen. All these people coming together. Claire touched the newspaper article gently. She knew it would happen. That's why she left all those plans, all those notes. She was just waiting for us to catch up to her vision. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, catching the gilt frame of Sarah's photograph on the wall. In it, she stood in this same kitchen, surrounded by canning jars and smiling students. The past and present seemed to merge in that moment. Her dream of a teaching farm coming full circle, finding new life in unexpected ways. The article had done more than share their story. It had opened a door, inviting the whole community to become part of Sarah's legacy. And through that door, hope was flooding in, as bright and warm as the sunlight that had always drawn Sarah to her beloved garden. The project blueprint spread across the kitchen table, its clean lines and careful measurements a stark contrast to the chaos of the morning's news. Claire traced the proposed renovation paths with one finger, while John stood at the window, his expression troubled. "They're saying we don't have proper permits," he said, holding up the notice that had arrived that morning. "That the zoning won't allow for educational facilities." Claire straightened up from the blueprints. "That's impossible. I checked everything myself. The property's agricultural designation specifically allows for educational programs. Not according to Midwest Development Corporation." John handed her another letter. "They're claiming the land was rezoned 6 months ago, part of some larger development plan." The blueprint between them suddenly seemed fragile, its carefully drawn future threatened by corporate letterhead and legal jargon. But something wasn't adding up. 6 months ago? Claire pulled out her laptop. "That's not possible. I have the county records right here." Her fingers flew over the keyboard. "The only zoning change request was denied." "Wait." She stopped, frowning at the screen. "The records have been altered." John leaned over her shoulder, looking at the dates. "Sarah always said to keep paper copies of everything." He disappeared into the study, returning with a thick folder. "Here, the original zoning documents with the county seal." They laid, the papers next to the blueprint, comparing dates and details. The evidence was clear. Someone had digitally altered the county records. "Midwest Development," Claire said slowly. "Why does that name sound familiar?" She dug through her research files until she found what she was looking for. "Here, they're the same company that's been buying up family farms all around the county, converting them to industrial agriculture." The blueprint seemed to mock them now, its clean lines representing everything that stood in the developer's way. A community education center, sustainable farming practices, a model that other small farms could follow, all threats to corporate agriculture's expansion plans. "They're not just challenging our permits," Claire realized. "They're trying to stop what this could become, what Sarah envisioned." John sat heavily in Sarah's old chair. Maybe we're in over our heads. These people have lawyers, money, influence. And we have this. Claire tapped the blueprint. Sarah's vision, backed by community support and legal documentation. Plus, she smiled grimly, they don't know who they're dealing with. She pulled out her phone, dialing quickly. Mark, Claire, Anderson, remember that favor you owe me? I need your legal team. Yes, all of them. She listened for a moment. No, this is bigger than permits. We've got evidence of record tampering. John watched as she transformed from friendly collaborator to corporate strategist, her voice taking on an edge he hadn't heard before. Send me everything you have on Midwest development, she continued, and get me a meeting with the county. Commissioners. Tomorrow. Hanging up, she turned back to John. Sarah saved me from a car wreck. The least I can do is save her farm from corporate raiders. They returned to the blueprint, but now with new purpose. Claire added notes in the margins, legal citations, environmental impact statements, economic projections. John contributed his own annotations about historical land use and community programs. See these sections? John pointed to the education spaces Sarah had planned. She designed them to serve the whole county, schools, seniors, families, everyone. Perfect! Claire's eyes lit up. That makes it a public interest project. The commissioners can't ignore that. She made another call. Tom, get the neighbors together, tonight. We're going to need everyone's help. As the sun set, cars began arriving at the farm. Neighbors, teachers, local business owners, the same community that had read about their plans in the newspaper now gathered. Around the blueprint, offering suggestions, sharing resources, building support. My cousin's an environmental lawyer, offered Mike from the hardware store. She'd love to help. I've got photos of all the school programs Sarah used to run, added Nancy from the library. Proof of historical use. Looking around the crowded kitchen, John felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. The strength of community, the power of shared purpose. The blueprint on the table was no longer just a drawing. It was becoming a battle plan, a rallying point for everyone who believed in Sarah's vision of what a farm could be. Tomorrow, Claire announced to the group, we show these developers that they picked the wrong farm to mess with. Sarah Harrison's legacy isn't for sale. The blueprint glowed under the kitchen lights, its future uncertain, but its purpose clear. Sometimes, John realized, you had to fight for dreams. Sarah had known that all along. The town hall buzzed with anticipation as Claire studied the meeting agenda. Under new business, a single line read, Harrison Farm Educational Center Proposal, Public Hearing. Her finger traced the words in the official minutes book. Soon, to be filled with the evening's proceedings. Standing room only, John whispered, looking at the packed chamber. Farmers in clean work shirts sat beside business owners in suits. Students wearing FFA jackets squeezed in next to elderly residents who remembered Sarah's first garden workshops. The council chairman called the meeting to order, his gavel echoing through the room. First speaker, Midwest Development Corporation. A polished executive in an expensive suit approached the podium, armed with glossy presentations. Ladies and gentlemen, the simple fact is that small farms are no longer economically viable. Our proposal offers fair market value for outdated properties, bringing modern agricultural efficiency to your community. The minutes taker's pen scratched steadily, recording each word. Speaker advocates for consolidated industrial farming model. Claims small farms obsolete. Presents economic projections for corporate ownership. Claire felt John tense beside her as the executive continued, describing their life's work as obsolete. She squeezed his hand gently, remembering Sarah's words in her final letter about the farm's true value. When their turn came, Claire approached the podium first. Instead of slick presentations, she opened Sarah's garden journal. Before I show you our proposal, I'd like to read something written by Sarah Harrison 15 years ago. The minutes recorded her next words carefully. Speaker reads passage. regarding community agriculture vision, notes historical significance of educational programs, presents evidence of illegal record tampering by Development Corporation. A murmur ran through the crowd at this revelation. The executive from Midwest Development shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Then John stood up. Claire had worried about him speaking publicly, but now his quiet strength filled the room. My wife Sarah taught me that a farm's value isn't just in its crops. It's in the lives it touches, the community it feeds, the future it builds. The minutes captured the parade of speakers that followed. Tom describing how Sarah had saved his farm during the drought of '98. The high school principal detailing how her students' test scores improved after participating in Harrison Farm's science programs. The local doctor explaining how Sarah's herb garden had helped patients who couldn't afford prescriptions. Minutes note, 47 community members speak in support of Harrison Farm proposal. No speakers oppose, except Development Corporation representative. Claire presented their final evidence, the original zoning documents, proof of tampering, environmental impact studies showing the dangers of industrial agriculture in their watershed. The corporate executive's face grew increasingly pale, but it was their blueprint that captured the council's imagination. As Claire walked them through the plans, she saw heads nodding, faces lighting up with recognition. This wasn't just about saving one farm. It was about preserving a way of life while building something new. The minutes recorded the council's questions, each answer strengthening their case. Yes, they had funding through grants and private investment. Yes, they had educational partnerships arranged. Yes, they could prove the economic benefits to the community. Finally, the chairman spoke. I remember Sarah Harrison's first proposal to this council 30 years ago. She wanted to start a small gardening class. Some people laughed, but she proved them wrong. And it seems she's still proving people wrong today. The minutes captured the vote with simple clarity. Motion to approve Harrison Farm Educational Center, zoning variance and historical designation. Vote, 7 in favor, 0 opposed. Motion carries. The corporate executive stormed out as cheers filled the chamber. Claire hugged John, feeling him trembling with emotion. One more item, the chairman announced. The council moves to establish the Sarah Harrison Community Agriculture Grant, supporting similar programs throughout the county. All in favor? The aye vote was unanimous. Later, reviewing the official minutes, Claire found herself touching the words that recorded their victory. But it was the last entry that brought tears to her eyes. Note for historical record, Council recognizes Sarah Harrison's contributions to community agriculture and education. Her vision, as presented by John Harrison and Claire Anderson, will continue to serve as a model for sustainable farming and community engagement. Meeting adjourned in her memory. John read it over her shoulder, his voice rough with emotion. She'd be amazed by all this. No, Claire said softly. She planned for it, every step. She just needed us to be ready to take those steps. The minutes book closed on their victory, but Claire knew it was really just the beginning. Sarah's vision was no longer just a dream preserved in journals and blueprints. It was becoming reality, one carefully recorded motion at a time. 6 months after the council meeting, John sat at the kitchen table, sorting through the morning's mail. What had once been a source of dread, bills and bank notices, had transformed into something wonderful. Every day brought new letters, each one a testament to Sarah's vision coming to life. Here's another one you should see, he called to Claire, who was preparing teaching materials for the afternoon's workshop. She joined him at the table as he opened the envelope. Dear Mr. Harrison and Ms. Anderson, he read aloud, my name is Maria Gonzalez. My children and I attended your family gardening workshop last month. I wanted you to know that we harvested our first tomatoes yesterday. My son Marco, who never ate vegetables before, ate 3 of them straight from the vine. Sarah's method of getting children excited about growing food really works. Thank you for continuing her programs. Claire smiled, remembering the workshop. Marco had been skeptical at first, but by the end he was eagerly planning his garden plot. Just as Sarah had predicted in her notes, children who grow food will eat food they grow. John picked up another letter. This one's from the Veterans Therapy Program. He unfolded the paper carefully, revealing pressed herbs attached to the corner, lavender and sage from their new healing garden. "The peace we find working in your gardens is beyond words," the letter read. "Sarah's dream of a place for healing has helped many of us find purpose again. One of our members is even starting a similar program at his farm down south." The letters kept coming. A local teacher describing how her students' science scores had improved after participating in the farm's educational programs. A retired doctor praising their continuation of Sarah's medicinal herb garden. A teenage girl sharing how working in the gardens had helped her through depression. "Look at this one," Claire said, opening a thick envelope. Inside was a collection of crayon drawings from the elementary school, showing happy stick figures in gardens bursting with oversized vegetables. "To Farmer John and Ms. Claire," the cards read. "Thank you for teaching us about butterflies and bees." John touched one of the drawings gently. Sarah always said children needed to understand where food comes from. She'd love knowing they're learning about pollinators too. The most meaningful letter had arrived that morning from a familiar name. Dr. Roberts, the emergency room doctor who had treated Claire after her accident 15 years ago. "Watching your work at Harrison Farm," he wrote, "reminds me of what Sarah told me that rainy day in the ER. Sometimes saving a life is just the beginning of the story." She was right, though I didn't understand then what she meant. Now I do. Claire wiped tears from her eyes as John read those words. "She did save more than just my life that day," she said softly. "She saved this place, this future. She knew exactly what she was doing." A knock at the door interrupted them. Tom's granddaughter Katie stood there, clutching her own letter. "Can I read it to you?" she asked shyly. "It's for my school project about community heroes." They welcomed her in, and she stood proudly in Sarah's kitchen, reading her carefully written words. "My hero isn't famous or rich. She was a farmer's wife named Sarah, who taught people to grow gardens and help each other. Even though she's gone now, her ideas are still growing. My grandpa says she was like a seed that planted hope in our town. Now that hope is sprouting everywhere." John and Claire exchanged glances, both moved by the simple truth in the child's words. The letters scattered across the table were more than just thank yous. They were proof that Sarah's legacy was alive, growing in ways even she might not have imagined. "We should save these," Claire said. "Start a book, like Sarah did with her. Recipes. Show how her dream keeps touching new lives." John nodded, already reaching for one of Sarah's empty journals. On the first page, he wrote simply, "The Harvest of Hope, Letters from Sarah's Garden." Outside, they could hear the afternoon workshop participants arriving, voices excited and eager to learn. Sarah's garden was flourishing, not just with plants, but with the growth of human spirits, just as she had always intended. Dawn broke over Harrison Farm with special beauty that morning. The freshly painted greenhouse gleamed in the early light, and garden paths wound through beds, bursting with summer growth. Above the restored barn entrance, a hand-painted banner fluttered in the breeze. "Welcome to Sarah's Community Gardens, Grand Opening Celebration." John stood beneath the banner, adjusting its height. "Think she'd approve of the name?" he asked Claire, who was checking last-minute details on her clipboard. "She'd pretend to be embarrassed," Claire smiled, "but secretly love it." The banner had been Martha's idea, created by local artists who remembered Sarah's encouragement of their first clumsy attempts at painting. The flowing script incorporated tiny daisies, Sarah's favorite, and the colors matched the wildflowers now blooming. Along the garden paths, People began arriving early, carrying potluck dishes made from recipes Sarah had shared over the years. Tom brought his famous cornbread, made with herbs from Sarah's original plantings. Nancy from the library wheeled in a cart of preserved photographs, showing the farm's transformation from past to present. Under the banner's gentle shade, generations mingled. Children ran through the teaching gardens, pointing excitedly at butterflies drawn to the flowering herbs. Veterans from the therapy program proudly showed off their healing garden to newcomers. Families who had attended the first workshops now demonstrated composting techniques to their neighbors. Claire watched John moving through the crowd, more at ease than she'd ever seen him. He'd found his own way of carrying Sarah's legacy forward, combining her warmth with his quiet strength. When he taught, he often started with "Sarah always said," but now added his own wisdom to hers. The official ceremony began at noon. As town council members and local dignitaries gathered, Claire noticed John slip away briefly. She found him in the kitchen, standing before Sarah's photograph. "I wish," he started. "She knows," Claire said softly. "Look out there. Everything." Though she dreamed about his happening, they returned to find Katie, Tom's granddaughter, had climbed up on a hay bale beneath the banner. "Can I tell them about the daisies?" she begged. "Like you told me?" John lifted her higher so everyone could see. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Katie's clear voice rang out. "Miss Sarah said, daisies are honest flowers. They don't try to be fancy or special. They just grow wherever they're needed, making the world prettier one bloom at a time. Like she did." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. More stories followed, memories of Sarah's kindness, her wisdom, her quiet way of helping without. Fanfare. The banner above seemed to glow in the afternoon light, each letter a tribute to the woman who had planted so many seeds of hope. As the celebration continued, Claire overheard snippets of conversation that would have made Sarah smile. Farmers discussing organic techniques with suburban gardeners. Teenagers teaching elderly neighbors about companion planting. Restaurant owners planning menus around the teaching garden's future harvests. "The banner's just the beginning," Claire told John as they watched the community mingle. "Wait until they see the new workshop schedule." John nodded, his eyes bright. "Sarah would say we're right on track. She always planned everything in seasons, not days." A breeze lifted the banner, sunlight catching the golden threads woven through the letters of Sarah's name. Below it, life flowed on, exactly as she had envisioned, though perhaps grander than even she had dreamed. The day wound down with a sunset potluck, shared at long tables set between the garden rows. As fireflies began to rise from the herb beds, someone started singing an old folk song Sarah had loved. Voices joined in, mixing with cricket song and children's laughter. The banner glowed softly in the twilight, no longer just a sign, but a promise kept, a dream realized, a new chapter beginning. Tomorrow the real work would continue, but tonight they celebrated the harvest of hope that Sarah had planted so many seasons ago. Late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the gathering as John and Claire stood before the covered memorial plaque. They had chosen to place it in Sarah's original herb garden, where the scent of lavender and rosemary filled the air, just as she had always loved. "Ready?" Claire asked softly, her hand on the cloth covering. John nodded, his fingers touching the small card in his pocket. The speech he'd prepared, but wasn't sure he could read. The plaque had been Claire's idea, but the words were his, crafted over many late nights at the kitchen table where Sarah had once planned her gardens. As Claire pulled away the covering, sunlight caught the bronze surface, making the words glow. "In memory of Sarah Harrison, 1962-2022. Every garden needs both sunshine and rain to grow. This land is more than earth and plants. It is the harvest of one woman's boundless heart. Through her wisdom, countless lives found root and flourished." Though she saw herself as a simple farmer's wife, Sarah Harrison was a teacher, healer, and keeper of hope. Her gardens continue to grow through the hands and hearts of all who gather here. May all who enter find the same gifts she freely gave. Knowledge to nurture growth, courage to weather storms, and faith in the promise of new seasons. A murmur of appreciation ran through the gathered crowd. The plaque captured Sarah's essence without pretense, exactly as she would have wanted. Claire stepped forward first, her voice strong despite her tears. 15 years ago, I was a lost teenager who crashed her car on a rainy day. Sarah Harrison pulled me from that wreck, but more importantly, she pulled me toward a better path. I never got to thank her properly, but this place, this continuation of her work, this is my thank you. She placed a single daisy at the base of the plaque, then continued. In business school, they taught me that success is measured in profits. Sarah taught me it's measured in lives touched, hope shared, and communities strengthened. Today, we dedicate this plaque not just to her memory but to her vision of what a farm could be. John stepped forward next, drawing the worn card from his pocket, but looking at Sarah's name gleaming in the sunlight. Different words came to him. Sarah never wanted recognition, he began. She'd probably tell us this plaque was too much. Fuss. But then she'd smile that smile of hers and find a way to use it as a teaching moment. Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. She'd point out how the bronze will weather over time, gaining character like a well-loved garden tool. She'd note how the afternoon sun hits it just right to warm the herbs she planted here. He touched the cool metal surface, tracing her name. Most of all, she'd remind us that memorials aren't about the past. They're seeds planted for the future. This plaque doesn't mark an ending. It marks a beginning, a promise that her work continues through all of us. Others stepped forward to share their memories. The high school students who now ran the junior gardening program, the veterans who found peace in tending the healing garden, the young mothers who learned Sarah's canning recipes. Each story added depth to the woman remembered in bronze. As the sun set, casting the plaque in golden light, something extraordinary happened. Katie, Tom's granddaughter, began placing her freshly picked daisies around the memorial. Other children followed suit until a ring of white flowers surrounded the bronze marker. Look, Claire whispered to John, pointing to the garden bed behind the plaque. Scattered among Sarah's carefully planned herbs, wild daisies had sprouted, volunteers that no one had planted. She'd love that, John smiled. Nature adding its own touch, just like she always said it would. The dedication ended as it had begun, with the scent of herbs on the evening air and the sense of Sarah's presence in every growing thing. The plaque would stand as a reminder not of what was lost, but of what continued to grow, a legacy as natural and lasting as the seasons themselves. Claire sat in the morning quiet of the greenhouse, opening a fresh, leather-bound journal, a gift from John on the anniversary of their partnership. Next to it lay Sarah's original garden journal, its pages worn and wise. The contrast between old and new struck her as she began to write. 1 year at Harrison Farm, spring brought 200 new gardeners to our beginner workshops. Sarah's methods still work. Start small, build confidence, celebrate every seedling. Today, Mrs. Chen showed me her first successful tomato harvest. Her hands trembled with pride as she held up the fruit, just as Sarah described in her notes about teaching new gardeners. John found her there, sunlight streaming through the restored glass panels. "Writing in your journal?" he asked, setting down a mug of coffee beside her. "Documenting our first year," Claire smiled. Sarah was right about keeping records. "Look at this." She turned to a page covered in pressed flowers and children's drawings. The school program has quadrupled since spring. The new journal documented more than just crop yields and weather patterns. Like Sarah's before it, it captured the human stories flourishing alongside the plants. Each page held testimonials, photographs, and pressed flowers, evidence of lives transformed. "Remember this day?" Claire pointed to an entry from early summer, "when the Veterans Therapy Group harvested their first lavender crop?" John nodded, reading the carefully preserved thank you note attached to the page. The group had gone on to start similar programs at 3 other farms in the county. They turned pages together, reviewing the year's milestones. The Autumn Harvest Festival had drawn visitors from 5 states. The cooking classes using Sarah's recipes now had a waiting list. The youth entrepreneurship program had helped 6 teenagers start their own market gardens. Sarah would love this section, John said, indicating the pages dedicated to their new seed-saving program. Local families were now preserving heirloom varieties, carrying on agricultural traditions that had nearly been lost. Claire touched a dried daisy pressed between the pages. I've been thinking about something Sarah wrote in her journal, about how success isn't measured in one season, but in what you plant for future generations. She turned to her latest entry. Today we hosted our 100th workshop of the year. Looking around the room, I saw Sarah's legacy in every face. The young mother learning to feed her family better, the retired teacher finding new purpose in tending herbs, the troubled teenager discovering peace in the garden paths. We're not just growing plants here. We're growing hope, confidence, community, just as Sarah always intended. John read over her shoulder, adding his own observation. Don't forget the new teaching kitchen. Sarah always said good food brings people together. Claire made the note, then sat back, looking out over the thriving gardens. The morning sun caught the dew on the herb beds, making them sparkle. In the distance, the first workshop participants of the day were arriving. Sometimes, she said softly, I feel her here. Not sad or distant, but proud. Like she knew all along what this place could become. She did know, John agreed. Every page of her journal shows it. She was planting seeds for this future long before we understood. Claire turned to a fresh page in the new journal, her pen hovering over the clean paper. What do you think the next year will bring? More stories, John said simply. More lives changed. More of Sarah's dreams taking root. As if in answer, a light breeze rustled through the greenhouse, carrying the scent of herbs and promise. Claire began to write again, recording not just what they had accomplished, but what they hoped to grow next. The new journal would never replace Sarah's original, nothing could, but it carried forward her vision, adding new chapters to a story that had started with one woman's belief in the healing power of gardens and community. Morning mist cloaked the cemetery just as it had 1 year ago, when a chance encounter changed everything. But this time, John wasn't alone as he approached Sarah's grave with fresh daisies in hand. Claire walked beside him, carrying her own bouquet. The headstone emerged from the mist, no longer a monument to loss, but a testament to legacy. They had replaced the simple vase with a small garden box where perennial flowers bloomed in season. Sarah's favorite varieties, naturally. Hard to believe it's been a year, Claire said softly, arranging her daisies beside John's. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I was standing here, holding that old photograph. John touched the cool stone gently. She would have liked how the story turned out. Together they tidied the small garden, working in comfortable silence. The morning sun began burning through the mist, revealing other changes in the cemetery. Inspired by Sarah's memory, they had started a community garden program here too. Now, patches of flowers brightened other graves, tended by families who had learned gardening through their workshops. Look! Claire pointed to a cluster of volunteer daisies growing wild at the edge of the plot. Just like in the teaching garden. Sarah always said plants know where they're needed, John smiled, just like people. From the road came the sound of cars pulling into the farm's parking lot. The day's first workshop would begin soon. New, gardeners eager to learn, to grow, to carry forward the legacy of a woman most of them had never met, but whose wisdom touched their lives daily. Should we head back? Claire asked, but John shook his head. Just a moment more. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, weathered envelope, the last letter from Sarah's recipe book, one he'd never shared before. I think it's time you heard this. The paper crackled softly as he unfolded it, age making the creases fragile. Sarah's handwriting flowed across the page, still clear despite the years. My dearest John, when you find this last letter, I hope you'll have discovered that endings are just new beginnings in disguise. I've loved watching you tend our farm all these years, but I've always known it was meant for more than just us. Sometimes the seeds we plant aren't meant to bloom in our own season. Keep your heart open to unexpected gifts. They often come disguised as challenges, like rain hiding the rainbow. And remember what I've always said about daisies. They're honest flowers, growing wherever they're needed, brightening corners others might overlook. All my love, always, Sarah. Claire wiped tears from her eyes. She knew, didn't she, that someday someone would need to find you just as much as you needed to be found. John carefully refolded the letter. Sarah always said true healing happens in gardens. Guess she made sure we had the right garden to heal in. The morning mist had burned away completely now, revealing the farm spread out below the cemetery hill. The greenhouse gleamed in the sunlight. The teaching gardens were already dotted with early visitors. A school bus was pulling into the parking lot, another class coming to learn about nature, nutrition, and the cycle of seasons. Time to get back, John said, touching the headstone one last time. We've got a new group of gardeners waiting to learn Sarah's secrets. As they walked down the hill, Claire looked back at the bouquets of daisies, bright and honest against the stone. Thank you, she whispered, not just to Sarah's memory, but to the magic of timing, chance, and healing that had brought her to this place. The farm waited below, ready for another day of growing hope. And somewhere they both knew Sarah was smiling at the garden her love had grown. A garden of flowers and food, yes, but more importantly, a garden of second chances and renewed dreams. In the end, it was just as Sarah had always said. Every garden needs both sunshine and rain to grow. And sometimes the most beautiful blooms come from seeds planted long ago, waiting for just the right season to flower.